neighbor David Gronowski. Welcome back to the program where we're flying high across the Sunshine State on FM and AM and on our podcast, our website at neighborschoice.com, or our video stream where we're coming to you live as well. Happy to have you there if you're listening on video or watching on video. And we're going to have another fun time talking about the issues from a deeper perspective that's rooted in principle, not silliness. We don't want to play blame games here where we're all about just raw for our team. We want to get down to business. We want to understand what's really behind the forces that we see in our world today, so that we're equipped with how to, handle things, how to move things in the right direction, how to guide our families towards a better family-friendly society. And so that's what we do. We look at culture. And, if you've listened to my program, that I've talked a lot about how politics is like, pro wrestling, that it's like a performance art, that it's a very interesting thing because, there's always a kind of suspension of disbelief that has to take place in order for people to get into the drama. And I've said recently that the referees are like the media is like the referees in wrestling, where you've got a situation where, people who are true believers watching the show, they think that referee is really there just to, call the rules. And they really believe that, but what's really going on is the ref is just kind of making it look official, kind of adding to the drama and the storytelling. And that's what the media is. People think, okay, media is just there. They're just independent. Yeah, they may have bias. But in reality, they're just trying to figure it out just like we are, but they're a little bit more experienced, a little bit more well-read, a little bit more closer to the power, so they can kind of figure it out a little better than the average Joe. And therefore, we just got to trust that they mean well and all this stuff. But meanwhile, they're actually the referees in pro wrestling. They're an actor too, in some sense. Now, I'm not saying that it's like some kind of giant conspiracy. That's a very low resolution way to look at it. What I am saying is that just because someone says they're a news organization doesn't make them some kind of neutral arbiter of reality. In reality, these are giant corporations that market their activities as a news organization, but in reality, there are PR firms for giant corporations and giant, government interests, giant industrial interests, giant, bureaucratic interests that have much, much more closer access to these companies than the average person. And so the idea that there will be a balanced perspective about our liberty and our health freedom and our right to self-defense, and speech, and critique of war, that's a very, very silly notion. And I saw a story today that I thought was interesting because it also looked at politics and pro wrestling and provided an interesting angle on how we should look at this democratic system we have today. It's on humanevents.com, the publication Human Events, and it's by Adam Ellwinger, who is a professor of English at the University of Houston, downtown, where he studies rhetoric, writing, and public discourse. How you doing, Adam?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, David.
Yeah, I saw your piece on Human Events, and it's kind of right up my alley. I'm always talking about politics as performance art and how that's really where we need to understand where things are. And your article was kind of right down that alley.
Well, thanks for reading. Yeah, it's been many years now since I was a regular viewer of professional wrestling, but I've been watching it more recently because my son is kind of at the perfect age for it, and so it was fresh in my mind. And watching the election sort of play out over the last 2 weeks really brought it back to mind in some critical ways.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit, kind of go through the article a little bit with us. The article is called Why I Still Care, Politics, Pro Wrestling, and the New World Order. Kind of give us a little summary of the article, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. Well, what the article is really about is the way that American democracy has become so choreographed, in part by institutions like the media and other elite institutions that you discussed on your opening here, And the essay kind of begs the question, well, if our democracy really is choreographed, if it is quote unquote fake like wrestling, where there's a particular outcome that is always set up to happen, then especially people who are conservatives are going to have to reimagine what participation in that system looks like. Because I think for a long time we've thought, well, it's my civic duty to vote, and as long as I go out there and do that, then I can trust that, we've had a fair election, I've had my say, and I can put my confidence behind the government that takes shape as a result of an election. I'm not sure that that's the case anymore. And I think that pro wrestling, in the sense that we understand when we watch a wrestling match that the match is rigged, so to speak, we learn, once we learn that it's rigged, we learn to watch wrestling in a new way, and also to participate as fans in a new way. And I think given the overt attempt by the media and other institutions to, I want to say put a finger on the scale, but it was more than a finger. It was more like a pickup truck. To put a pickup truck on the scale of the election, we're going to need to find a different way to engage politics in those circumstances.
So let's start with the first claim about, basically that our democracy is rigged, just like the outcome of of a wrestling match is a rigged game, like people know. So how is how is our democracy rigged?
Well, if we discount any of the reports of fraud or ballot abnormalities and just assume that the actual vote was all on the up and up, all legit, I would still argue that, in fact, the outcome was more or less rigged. When you have a media that is uniformly not only, magnifying the negatives of a particular candidate and concealing the negatives of the opposing candidate, also is no longer bound by truth, in the sense that they will report untruths and neglect to report truths. In that scenario, they have a very great capacity to shape public opinion to their interests. And then on top of that, you consider that many of these media outlets are also conducting their own polling, which they then release to the public as sort of an objective measure of public opinion, when they themselves have structured that public opinion very carefully by curating what information is accessible to the public and what information takes on the gravity of the issues of the day.
So why do you think the media and their polling has such a rigged nature? Do you think they're just caught up in groupthink, or they just culturally prefer the brand that the Democrat Party represents? What do you think's going on there?
Well, I think that I work in a university, obviously, and I think my adult life has been spent in universities. I'm 42 years old now, and I haven't been off of a college campus since I was 18. And some of your listeners might think, my God, this guy must know nothing about the real world. He's been on campus for the last 25 years. But it's true that university life does constitute a different reality in some ways than what the public encounters and experiences. And so in the universities over the last 50 years, there's been an enormous embrace of subjectivity or perspectival ethics. So this idea that nobody can be objective, that in fact truth as an idea is really just a power game to preserve the power of elites. And I think this really shapes what's taught in some fields. And certainly any of the major journalists in the media are coming out of the universities and are often heavily steeped in these ideas that we can't get to truth, that in fact truth is perspective, and so any claim to a universal truth is inherently unethical. And I think when you take that into the world of journalism, you decide, well, whose perspective do I want to represent here? And given that there's no essential truth, you pick which truths will be magnified as truth. And I think that in their case, the old idea is that the media exists to, to afflict the powerful and give powerful to the afflicted. And I think that they see their mission very much as that. Also, I think that media entities are heavily steeped in Marxist socialist thought, which is still very, very influential in academic contexts. And I think that they see the Democratic Party as an instrument by which to advance socialist economic principles and Marxist cultural ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to see that influence. Why do you think that they care so much about victims, but at the same time they don't really care about ending the wars? If you're thinking about journalists and they're all kind of, as you said, seeing themselves as defending the weak, they talk about stories of, police brutality, like what happened against George Floyd, and yet they don't care about escalating conflict in Syria. CNN comes out with hit pieces every time, or New York Times does too, every time there's a story that says Trump wants to pull a troop out of Syria or Afghanistan. How is it that in their mind, these writers that are writing these stories, if they're just, they're biased, okay, we got that. They believe in perspectival truth. They believe in subjectivism. But at the same time, why are they handmaidens for the empire?
Well, I think, on the question of war specifically, I think that if we look at recent history, we've seen that these mass media entities really are agnostic on the status of war, right? They don't have a fixed position on war as a global phenomena. And so when we have a George W. Bush in office who is engaging in military action abroad, the mass media is able to motivate millions of people to demonstrate in the streets against war in principle, not just this specific war, that specific war, but against war writ large. And they will beat the anti-war drum exactly so long as, I think, a conservative remains in office, at which point the script will flip, and they will not argue always in defense of wars, but all of a sudden the wars will become a lower priority. And so we know that Barack Obama, in fact, expanded American military engagement abroad, but that was not a big concern in news media, and the anti-war left kind of fell into dormancy for a while. And then when Trump came in, Trump, interestingly, was really looking to draw down that presence, which you would think would earn him some credit from the media, but instead they were forced into a pro-war position, because now that a Republican was saying, let's end the war, it was, oh, no, that's so reckless to get out of these military conflicts. And so what we see is that they are not anti-war, and this is in line with the subjectivism. Their position on war changes depending on political contingencies. And this is the way that we know that the anti-war movement on the left is not a principled movement, but is a tactical, orchestrated effort to influence political outcomes in this country.
Yeah, and what's disturbing is to think if George Floyd was a outspoken Trump supporter, they probably wouldn't have turned his story into a cause that they would unite around either. And I believe we should be concerned about human life, no matter who they are, that all life is sacred, but that may not be the principle that is moving the narratives of mass media. We'll be back with more on A Neighbor's Choice, talking about the question, is politics pro wrestling? What can we learn from looking at these two, comparing these two things in our life? And we'll be back in just a moment with more. David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to CataniaCatania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender. Is politics pro wrestling? Should we care if that's true? We're speaking with Adam Ellwanger, a writer at humanevents.com, who's got a piece out today called Why I Still Care, Politics, Pro Wrestling, and the New World Order. And so there's some comments online I'll get to. Some of our listeners. Mark, to the question, is politics pro wrestling, says, yes, it is. James says, no, it's not. There are good guys in pro wrestling. Amishi says, definitely. He says, I'll go a step further. It's entertainment for the educated, socially active class. Jeremy comments about your article. That was a great article. And another listener says, the question is, if it's true, and it is, who is the choreographer? So what's your answer to that, Adam?
The choreographer? Well, that's an interesting question. I think that it seems to me that the choreographer is kind of an unholy alliance of mass corporate media, left-leaning public institutions, and a administrative state that remains unchanged even as politicians cycle in and out of government depending on elections. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of choreography. One of the interesting things I think about the comparison that I make between wrestling and politics is that wrestling, when you figure out it's fake, will wink at you, right? And sort of acknowledge that you're in on the joke and invite you to stay invested for the sake of the performance art. The difference is that we're seeing right now, we have in this past election 2 weeks ago, more evidence of fraud and abnormalities than any other modern election in American history. And yet we're told that to even talk about this is to undermine American democracy itself. And I think this is where you see the difference between wrestling and politics. Whereas wrestling, when it's fake, Vince McMahon or whoever is in charge of wrestling will wink at you and say, haha, you're in on the joke now. In politics, even when the mask slips, they demand that we continue to treat it as real. And I think that the reason for that is because it's very important that the public believe it as real, because the charade of voting, right, is what serves as a tacit affirming of the powers in charge, right? So as long as we have a vote, everybody goes out, you enter in your ballot on that computer, right? And then it spits out a result, whether that result is accurate or inaccurate. It was the sort of masquerade or drama of actually going out and voting that provides the legitimacy to the new order, and in this case, to a potential Democratic administration. And so even though with wrestling, adults could say, yeah, it's fake and it's fun, right? Even though politics works in similar ways, we are told that we cannot consider these ways that our democracy has been undermined by these powers.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, just for clarification for our audience, you're not saying that like wrestling, two wrestlers, they're playing the good guy and bad guy, but they're in on who's going to win. You're not saying politicians are in on who's going to win each election. Like, oh, I'm going to look like I'm going to run for president, but I know you're going to win, but I'm going to make you.
Oh, no.
Yeah, you're not saying that. I want people to be
not.
clear that you're not going to that extent.
No. I think probably, especially I think the lower you get down the chain in terms of offices, the more authentic American democracy is. So I think in local contests, there's a very good reason to have faith in the fairness of elections, if only because the media in general doesn't cover local contests nationwide. And I also think that the powers, the other powers that have capacity to influence votes, don't play in those local contexts. So in a sense, I think if we're going to acknowledge the way that institutional powers have come to influence national politics, then what we should pursue is a reorientation towards the local. Yeah. Because I think that that's where American democracy is still really authentic and visceral.
Yeah. So it's mass democracy that may be a little bit too fragile for manipulation. And I do think it's a manipulation by groupthink. It's not something planned, although they certainly collude and work together as they did when they gave questions to Hillary, and they probably did stuff like that for Biden. I remember hearing reports about after the election night, Biden was huddling around with the press. And I was like, yeah, that's a team meeting. They are, that's a team. They're huddling together to figure out what's the next little talking points. We're going to use Dark Winter. We're going to wait for that. Let's slow down on the Dark Winter story. That'll come out in a couple weeks. Don't worry. We're going to do another story right now called Let's Hug. And they just do these stupid little gimmicks, and people who are low info about this stuff, they just get drawn right into it. Let's talk about how to deprogram from this performance art when we continue in just a moment. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice.
The Pennsylvania Supreme Court has ruled 5-2 against the Trump campaign in a case which questioned whether election officials provided meaningful access to campaign observers who wanted to monitor the counting of mail-in ballots. President-elect Biden was briefed today by a slate of former and outside experts on national
I
security.
think we have to renew American leadership, put the United States back at the head of the table, mobilizing global actions that we're going to have to meet.
The Trump administration is still blocking Mr. Biden from daily briefings that normally accompany this time in a transition. The Pentagon has announced a troop drawdown in Iraq and Afghanistan to 2,500 in each country by mid-January. The governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, placing a curfew on bars and restaurants with COVID cases on the rise. The U.S. now averaging over 150,000 new cases a day, according to Johns Hopkins University. Daria Albinger, ABC News.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
Hello, David Gronowski here. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. We're talking with Adam Ellwinger, who is a writer. He's a professor. He's got a piece out today in humanevents.com. He's a professor of English at the University of Houston downtown. And he's got a piece out comparing politics and pro wrestling called Why I Still Care. So, Adam, I talk about politics as a vestige of basically the way we used to deal with things in the old days was a scapegoat ritual. We had sacrificial rituals, we had taboos, and I like your piece because it talks about how there's a need to have buy-in. You got to get everybody to vote. So it feels like you're kind of spreading the guilt for all the bad stuff that's going to happen when the politicians on both sides of the aisle keep doing horrible things. They bail out banks. They cripple the jobs for the little guy that doesn't have any lobbying power in D.C. They say they're there for our best interest, but they get so much wrong. They take our money. They used it to support giant corporations, and they throw communist-type scraps to us like dogs, and they want us to pick it up and say, look, thank you for the crumbs. And yet we see through that, right? But they want us to buy in by getting us all to vote. And that's why there's a lot of peer pressure from folks that don't vote. There's always this push that says, hey, you're not really allowed to comment or critique anything if you don't vote. And I'm not saying you should vote or not vote, but what I am saying is there's a tremendous amount of peer pressure built into our culture that says everybody gets their finger dirty in this mess, so that when the wars continue and the bailouts continue and the crooked justice system continues, we're all kind of in on it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you were talking before the break about deprogramming from the performance art, and I was thinking about that, and I think that for me, the best way to do that is to turn off cable news and, maybe put down the newspaper and instead talk to people. That's an old-fashioned idea, but, talking to people who live in your community, who are both similar to you and different from you, and talk to them about how their lives are, what are their concerns. And I think that as we do that, we find that perhaps the concerns of the people in our orbit as we go about our lives are not the concerns that are represented on many of these mass media things. So I think the solution lies in a vigorous public discourse in a very traditional democratic sense. But there's a problem because now those same powers that influence the elections are moderating public discourse, right? There was a Pew poll about a year ago now that said that 61% of Americans are afraid to voice political opinions for fear of consequences. And in that climate, right, where at least half the nation feels intimidated and feels like they can't say what they think, then that public discourse is disabled on the individual level, which only grants that much more power to the media entities in order to curate what little discourse does occur. And so I think a big thing that lies before us is to defeat things like political correctness, to reject punishment for speech, whether that's in work context, university context, or political context, because until we can talk to each other, in spite of our disagreements, without fear of reprisal, then we really can't even get a sense of what needs to be done. And that is the central goal of politics, is answering that question. What should we do?
Mm-hmm. And I believe that in some sense, Donald Trump was kind of, you were saying earlier about how pro wrestling winks at its audience when it lets you know that it's kind of in on the joke, that this is fake. I think Donald Trump kind of did that to some extent, you know, because he talked about that which was supposed to be unseen. You know, he'd talk about, should I bomb the oil? Should I bomb their country and take their oil? Or should I say this? If I talk about this, will this help my political chances? He would say that out loud at the debates and say it out loud in front of the rallies. So he kind of was letting the stuff that's supposed to be unseen, seen, and therefore it kind of winks at the audience that maybe this thing is not exactly what you thought it was, you know?
I think that's an apt comparison. In my article, I talk about how when I was young and a big fan of wrestling, a good friend of our family who was Scottish would get really frustrated at me for watching this. And the reason he didn't know why or couldn't understand it was because he'd tell me, this is fake, this is ridiculous, why are you watching this? And I would liken Donald Trump to our Scottish friend, right, who was always kind of pulling the veil off of that and saying, look at that, he didn't really hit him, he just jumped and acted like he did, you know, and sort of unveiling the theatrical dimensions of it, which of course was instrumental in changing the way that I viewed wrestling, you know, and I was able to take a more adult perspective on it, where it was no longer competitive sport to me, but performance art, right? And I think that if that comparison is apt, right, if what we're witnessing really is a change in American democracy from a competitive political battle towards simply a play, you know, that has some dark implications for life in this country. And for those of us who are on the losing end of some of these cultural battles, we're going to need to figure out ways to respond to that change that are not limited to simply casting a vote every 2 years.
Yeah, in your article on Human Events, you said we need to reject the spectatorship that the great powers of our society offer to us under the name of participation. The question now is how to act under the new regime in ways that affirm individual agency and transcend the symbolic forms of participation that allow the system to maintain the veneer of democracy. So what are some other ways? You mentioned talking to people in person, but do you have other things? I mean, I can think of, you know, I think jury participation and being able to use jury, what they call nullification, which is actually just what the jury system was designed by John Adams and Jefferson and others. They designed it to be a last check. When democracy fails, you can use juries to judge bad laws, so that if there's tyrannical laws, you have the ability at that direct local level to, you know, to not enforce those bad laws. That's what they used for the Fugitive Slave Act. And there's a question about when is that appropriate to use for other bad laws that are all around us today. Do you see that as one tool, or what are some other tools if not?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that any form of public engagement is a step in the right direction. So I would say talk to people. I would say, participate, especially in politics at the local level where you live. I would also say, many years ago now, it's probably 10 years ago, but a book came out called Bowling Alone. And what the book talked about was how the forms of civic association that my father's generation and his father's generation had in forms of, say, like bowling leagues, right? Or the Lions Club or whatever. That those flourished, and that's really dropped out of American life because when we all get home from work, we just watch Netflix with our family, until we go to sleep or whatever. And I think a revitalization of that civic culture really is the answer, but the question is how it can be accomplished. And to that, I'm sorry to say, I don't have a real good answer.
A listener, Amici Online, says perhaps a first good step to walk away from this is to stop referring to news, science, and academia as truth source and refer to them as sense-making systems. And so that's, you want to comment on that?
I think that's a very good way to think about it, right? Because I think that science at large, academia, are very, very good at critiquing the idea of truth and indeed even mocking it until they need to claim their expertise and authority to dictate it. So, like, truth's a big joke until we get to say, kids in cages, and then truth matters a lot again, right?
Yeah.
And you don't get to play it both ways. Either the truth matters or it doesn't, and you don't get to pick based on what day of the week it is or on who the truth affects as how much it matters. And I think that's a great idea. I mean, I would not look at universities or science or the media or news as arbiters of truth today. They act in that role, but they've defaulted on the obligations that role entails.
To me, they look more like advertising agencies for corporate interests and government interests, and they look more like PR firms trying to push a certain narrative. It seems to me that the groupthink sense-making apparatus that these media outlets they have for some long time now tried to basically make us see that, I've said this a lot, that the Republicans are the team that plays the Harlem Globetrotters. They're meant to get dunked on in spectacular manner. That's what they're there for. And I think that a lot of the Republican politicians and Republican political efforts are more technical focused. They're more looking at the short term, and they don't have that same deep religious zeal that animates the base of the left. And so the right just doesn't have the stomach to fight for their things that they champion for, like liberty and life, to the same zeal and strategic hunger that the left does. The left is relentless. They put it out.
That's absolutely true, right? And there's no question, if the past 2 weeks have showed anything, it's that the right-wing conservative groups in this country have not a quarter of the organizational power that left activist groups have. And that's something, if conservative ideas want to live on in America, I think that conservatives need to take some notes on how the left is able to use organization and agitation as means to force an agenda.
Now, one good thing that I'm going to say about this is that the left has had cultural, power for generations, but it's just now recently started to look so preachy and didactic and, demagogic and blowhard-like, because I think that's a sign that they're actually losing their cultural power that they've had. Because I explain it like this: when you have a culture, say, 1600s or so forth, and you're in that time period, no one is really worried about preachiness from religion unless there's a interreligious dispute. You don't have to think about preachiness with Christianity too hard. You're pushing it too hard, too didactic, too dogmatic. But when now today, because Christianity is not as metaphysically on the throne, it looks, when it's being presented in the public square, like it's trying hard, like it's trying to sell you, right? And the same thing I see emerging very quickly here with the left. Whereas in the old days, American films and music and everything was very deeply liberal minded and the values of egalitarianism and so forth. But now it's way preachier. Look at like Star Wars, right? The new Star Wars movie, so heavy handed. We see it now. And I think that's always a sign that a reigning religion has lost its power when it feels preachy to people in the middle who are not really devoted to the big, political or cultural debates,
Yeah, that's, I think, a succinct way to say what you're saying is like all the talk about liberation, right, loses its magic when everybody's fully liberated.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's kind of for me, that's the situation that the left finds itself in. Once they've checked off sort of every boutique item on their agenda, and they're going to have to find, even more minuscule and obtuse injustices in order to maintain a liberatory rhetoric.
And of course,
I think it'd be interesting to see them do that.
And the power of unauthorized media is that it shows the left mobbing and beating people up, and it shows the lie, like the story with the Nicholas Sandmann, where the mob was trying to lie, and we could see clearly. And those different alternative media perspectives from the citizen camera is doing a number on the left's legitimacy, because people for so long always believed, well, the problem with the left is, this was the conventional American line about the left. The problem with them is they just care too much. They're just a little too emotional. That's it. They don't really know pocketbook math very well. But other than that, they're the bleeding hearts. And it's like, after you see them pushing for wars, after you see them shaming Nicholas Sandmann, a kid, for smiling the wrong way when people are trying to threaten him, after you see, Trump supporters being bloodied up for no reason, you saw, black conservative women being stabbed recently in DC or somewhere. We hear about these stories. Eventually it's like, wait a second, this isn't a bleeding heart story. And that's always been their trump card, was we get to do what we want because we're the place for people for emotions and feelings and care for the little guy. But once you see enough little people hurt callously, it kind of ruins that magic, doesn't it? And I think that's what's happening.
Well, you put your finger on it, with all the sanctimonious talk about unity and healing, after the left worked assiduously for 4 years to destroy Trump and the right. The demonstration of that unity and healing was on display in Washington, D.C. this weekend when people were getting beat up in the streets. And I hope that it's not lost on, especially on those who might be called moderates, who succumb to both sidesism, right? Like, both sides do have problems, but let's not pretend that they constitute equal threats, because they don't.
Right. We're out of time here, but I just want to ask you a real quick question here. Since you're a professor of English at a university, do you see the importance of liberal arts education here for people who are tired of this out of control neoliberal kind of heavy-handedness? Is that important to go back and get a good humanities education, good liberal arts education, get into art and make good art?
Absolutely. I mean, in the sense that we need to discover what is the human essence so that we can remember what we share and what we have in common, so that we can learn to love one another again. That's what humanities education is about. And when it's not done as propaganda, it can be really transformative.
Wow. Well, very good. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Adam Ellwanger. Appreciate your time. Yes. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Very good. We'll continue in just a moment with more on A Neighbor's Choice. Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to CataniaCatania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania Catania personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Looking to enhance your workout at home social distancing? There's no better way to do that than with a post-workout supplement from Fortify. It's the new all-in-one pre- and post-workout supplement. It's completely all-natural. There are no artificial flavors or sweeteners. Fortify Fit is the first of its type in the U.S. Fortify Fit combines all 10 of the latest sports nutrition ingredients in one canister. Build muscle, strength, endurance with Fortify Fit. Plus, it'll kickstart your immune system quickly, safely. Right now, you receive 25% off by using the code RADIO. Use the code RADIO to receive the 25% off discount. Fortify Fit, created and designed by board-certified Dr. Michael Lang. You know him as the radio host of Ask the Doctor. Get Fortify Fit with 2 delicious flavors, strawberry, watermelon, and fruit punch. Amazing results when using pre- and post-workouts. Fortify Fit, available at fortify.com. That's FORTIFEYE.com. Remember the EYE in Fortify. Dr. Michael Lang's Fortify Fit with 2 delicious flavors, keeping America fit and healthy during this time of precautionary change.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. Hello, David Gronowski here, your host of A Neighbor's Choice. We just had a great conversation with Adam Ellwanger, a professor of English and writer at humanevents.com. Very great piece. It was a fun piece because it's right, we've been talking like this on our program for some time. It's always great to see other perspectives who are coming into the same framework of analysis. Look at some of the comments from you guys listening on our video stream. Amisha says, I agree with you on the decline of the left and the culture war. I feel like it started way back in 2016 with the deplorables content. And I agree, that was a big moment because people saw that there was a lot of viciousness towards people who didn't have a lot of power. And look, they can try to paint and marginalize, anybody who doesn't get on with their neoliberal program as a Russian bot, and then no one believes it. And it was backfired completely. Then they try to demonize and say, well, if you believe in, anything about what Trump stands for, you're a supremacist, white supremacist. And then he got the biggest turnout for non-white voters that any Republican candidates had for the presidency since 1960. Totally backhanded that stupid idea. So the left is losing so much of their cultural power. That doesn't mean we're team Trump or team anything. We don't do that on this program. We're looking at things at a bigger perspective. And we see the good in certain forces. We see the downside. We see the complicated, nuanced perspective. And we try to make sense of it for our friends and family so we can have a happy life. And that's what we've got to have. We've got to have a conversation rooted in the truth. I believe that logos is more powerful than logos, right? We got logos, which is from, the real word, which cuts through the lies, cuts through the phony piece, cuts through the phony, deceptive sloganeering and mythology, and logos, which represents big business, big government, and all their little sloganeering. And logos, which is the word, will defeat the logos, right? The simple little cheesy neolib programming. It's all falling apart. that doesn't mean it's all going to be Pollyanna. It's going to be bumpy. It's going to be rough. But we have to be able to build a conversation, as our last guest said, that is promoting the human spirit, promoting love. That is not an antiquated concept. The folks who are in neoliberal media hive mind mentality, they say love trumps hate, but then they want to go and support occupying Syria. These are the same people that know how awful Iraq turned out to be, how horrific it was for human bloodshed, suffering, maiming, blowing people up, hurting kids, terrible, disgusting things happening in Iraq. They see that happening in other countries like Libya, unleashing a trade of slaves to the tune of 2 million people in Africa. And we're supposed to just believe that love Trump hates means they're not hateful. No, that is extremely hateful. And all the people who are moderate and independent minded in America watching this discourse, they're being converted away from this failing religion, this neoliberal failing religion. They're walking away from it, and not just on a partisan level, they're culturally walking away from it. Another listener, Reed, says the new counterculture will be a revival of belief in the living God, pursuit of happiness through individual responsibility and authentic relationships. Civic engagement flowing from that is the goal. Another listener, Vegas, says the left is motivated by dogma. Mental warfare is currently underway. And Furby Slayer says, keep the conversation going, brother. Well, I appreciate these feedback, these conversations, always very intelligent discussion in our comment section. Always like hearing from you all. I like reading your comments on live radio. I always know it's good stuff. And, you know, the left is motivated by dogma, but their dogma is a cheap imitation of the real thing, which is the revelation of Jesus. Jesus revealed things hidden since the foundation of the world. And those things hidden include the need to sacrifice somebody else for you to feel better. And it's falling apart. And you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. You can't put sacrifice back together again. Even if you try to imitate Jesus with some kind of concern for victims, you can see the thin veneer of neoliberalism's concern for victims. You see it fly off when there's a storm or there's a wind, and you see the ugly core of sacrifice still at the heart of that ideology. And that's why they're going to lose the day. But we have to bring people out peacefully. We can't say, oh, we'll get our power, we'll get all of our people in power, and we'll force our way. No, that's not the way of the cross. And the way of the cross is you desire mercy, not sacrifice. That doesn't mean you're a dupe. It doesn't mean you're a doormat, but it does mean that we don't initiate violence to try to force our ideas into reality. That's what made the heavy-handedness of the left project fall apart. That's what's allowed right-wing movements to fall apart. So we have to follow the way of the master himself, who is the master of history, Jesus, and learn what it means to desire mercy, not sacrifice. I'm David Gronowski. Email me, hello@aneighborschoice.com. Remember, you got to think for yourself, turn off the negativity. Godspeed.